what has it been like to live in the midst of so much of checking and counter-checking ever since you wrote a book, The Gujarat Files? What has life been like with someone always peering over your shoulder, with a shadow following all the time?
How does it feel to me? Like I was discussing with you earlier, before I was discussing with the management about coming here, and in my head, the idea was, okay, how do I do this? Because in a span of 10 days, I had to appear in 4 different courts. I had to appear on Friday in a Mumbai court in a defamation case for an article I wrote in 2008 against Sanatan Sanstha, this Hindu nationalist organization. And the accusation against me, the charges against me, is that I'm a practicing Muslim, I'm hence prejudiced. 2 days later, I had a tax case in the tribunal. And now, as soon as I go to Bombay, I have to head for questioning in a case where the Delhi High Court has asked the Delhi police to file an FIR against me for a tweet I made in 2012, which is allegedly anti-Hindu and anti-India. And then on the 24th, I leave for Ghaziabad in a money laundering case. And 29th, I come back for defamation. So I sometimes wonder, like, I only see lawyers and courtrooms and crooks and criminals in courtrooms. And when I do manage to find the bandwidth to report, for instance, when I went to Manipur last year, in November, I think. I went to Manipur, I went to Assam. As soon as I went to Manipur, at the airport, this official comes and says, "Ma'am, I'm from immigration." So I look at him and say, "But I think Manipur is in India. Why do I need to speak about immigration in Manipur?" He's like, "No, what are you doing here?" And then the cops, the Manipur state cops and intelligence officials followed me everywhere for 3 days or 4 days till I was in Manipur. They came to my Airbnb in which I was staying. They wanted to check my room. They questioned the owner of the Airbnb. They followed me everywhere, including every time I would meet a member of the Kukis or the Metis, I would get a call from an intelligence official. Worst case, we were traveling in a village and I had to use the washroom and there was no electricity. It was 5 in the evening and the IB guys were following me. And when I was using the washroom, I left the door open and this IB guy is standing there. So I was so frustrated by then. I was bleeding. It was my periods. So I removed my sanitary napkin and flashed it to him, saying, "Can I change my sanitary napkin?" Probably at that point of time, he felt slightly embarrassed and left. And then I wrote about it. I called up a few editors in Delhi, and then CPJ did a report. So the thing is, how do you report when you have somebody watching over your shoulder all the time? And how do you report when you are appearing in court, you're appearing in front of police officers who humiliate you all the time? By the time you come back, you're exhausted. And that's the point. And that's exactly what the government wants to do. It wants to exhaust you. So on the face of it, they would say, well, she's not behind bars, she's free. But am I really free? There are these court cases, there is the harassment, and then when I go on social media, there is an entire army which wants to bill me as this debauched woman. Like Meena said, the idea is to not basically target you because of woman. It's about a political system that wants to discredit you. So when they run a hashtag says Rana Ayub CD, the idea is people want to know what is there in the CD. If it's a woman, it has to be a sexual content. If they morph my image, the best example though, in December, a man from the BJP, followed by the Prime Minister's Twitter handle, shares an image of me in a porn video. It's a deepfake art AI-generated image. It's a Prime Minister, the man is followed by the Prime Minister. And we're talking about patriarchy and things to change from the bottom down. No, things changed right from the top because the people at the top have signaled to us that this is how this is how if you're a Muslim woman, God damn it, if you're a Muslim woman, you are a marked woman and you will not be spared. So that's what it is.
Rana, you spoke about having, despite doing this, you've been doing a lot of investigative stories. You're a columnist for the Washington Post. So when you write stories, is it the death of investigative journalism in India? Because you find that so many journalists that one looked up to, that one admired, no longer write the kind of stories that they used to. For instance, this is a country which exposed the Bhagalpur blindings. It was done by a journalist. This is a country that brought down the Antole government during the cement scandal. It was again Arun Shourie and his team which brought down the government. This is a story that reported very much on the emergency excesses. And yet now we are a democracy. There is no emergency, and journalists are jailed, journalists are maimed, journalists are killed everywhere in India, not only where there's a conflict zone. So in that scenario, do you think it is that investigative journalism is dying a quiet death and not enough noise is being made about it everywhere?
Absolutely. You have Siddique Kappan from Kerala. He was in jail for 3 years and nobody spoke about him. You know, there are journalists in Kashmir. Every single day, there are journalists in Kashmir who are being hounded. But how many times do people in the Delhi Press Club hold a solidarity meeting with them? Our solidarity exists depending on our proximity to the national capital. As far as investigative journalism is concerned, there was a time when it was considered a badge of honor to be an investigative journalist. Now, when you publish an investigation, you have to be ready to be accused of being funded by either George Soros or US aid or God forbid, God knows. You're scared of investigating because you know the next day there is going to be an enforcement directorate or an income tax at your doorstep. It's not that there is a dearth of sources, there's a dearth of people giving the stories. It's the journalists themselves who are self-censoring. One, because they know their editors will not be interested in publishing those big investigations. And two, you know the cost of publishing an investigation is that your family will be thrown behind bars. We talk about all the big cases of arrest. We talk about Gauri Lankesh, and I'm glad we talk about all these cases. But do we know of a man called Rupesh Kumar in Chhattisgarh? Do we know of the journalist in Maharashtra? Do we know about journalists in Kashmir who I was in Kashmir again 3 months ago where I met at least 40 journalists, and out of which only one agreed to come on record. And as soon as I left, he said, "Ma'am, the IB guys are here to question me." This is what we talk. This is journalism. How do you expect investigative journalism then to flourish in a country like this? I mean, honestly, some of us really have the privilege of being in platforms like this, going abroad, speaking at international platforms, and that is probably what is keeping us alive, that we are not being killed like Gauri Lankesh. If they had the first opportunity, they would use their henchmen to bump us off. But when they're not doing that, I was about to do a big investigation. This was last year during Ramadan, and at 3 in the morning, I got 7 income tax notices for 7 crores as demand. Now, when I looked at it, it said it had disallowed all my income tax over the last 5 years. Like all the income tax that I had paid had been disallowed. My bank accounts, by the way, have been frozen by the Indian government. So, probably not a lot of people do not know this. I've been accused of money laundering from my savings to my current account. I was speaking to one of the Supreme Court judges of the record. He said, you should consider it a badge of honor. You're probably the only money laundering case in which a laundering has been filed from the savings to the current account. And that's where we are. And I must confess that it does hurt me and my conscience that I really want to do that investigative work. When I came back from Manipur, I'm itching to write that Manipur story, but I still feel I've not completed that story. Why? Because everywhere the IB guys were following me, the police guys were following me, I could not meet my sources. How do you do investigation? And it is frustrating. The publication that I was working, Tehelka, which was known for investigative journalism, disbanded. What are the publications? You do have independent organizations like Article 14, Scroll, Caravan, which are doing, but then we know where are the funds for these publications, where are the subscribers for these publications. Whatever content we are getting about mob lynching, about bulldozer action, is coming from young independent journalists who are doing that at great risk to their lives on social media. And they are also now being threatened by the Indian laws that they will not arrest the guy who is giving the hate speech, they will arrest the person or threaten to arrest the person who's sharing the clip. I don't blame the journalist. A lot of journalists come into the profession because they also have to feed their family. If they have to fight court cases, how will they feed their family? So I understand. But what does this mean for a generation of journalists? When I look at young journalists coming to me, it's really embarrassing. What do I tell them? How do I encourage them to join this profession? What do I tell them that this is the stellar profession that everybody used to talk about, the most noble profession of them all? I mean, I'm sorry, but we are nothing more than press releases, mouthpieces of the government. The top journalists are busy getting access with the Prime Minister and the Minister. It's not just BJP, it's across the board. All senior journalists love access, right? So at the end of the day, where is journalism?